My husband was on a bicycle and a car hit him directly from behind at 45 miles an hour. We had 2 years of hell and then several years of adjustment after that. It's mind-blowing. It's sad and it's scary and it sends you to a place of darkness that, people can't really imagine. There comes a point when you have to let it go. And every day we wake up is really a new opportunity.
When a loved one suffers and survives a traumatic brain injury, everything changes for both the survivor and the entire family. Today, we're talking to author Rosemary Rawlins about going through the worst experience in her life and eventually finding meaning by using her new knowledge to help others and staying the course long enough to arrive at a place where there's still time for joy. Hello, I'm Sandra Levine, host of Still Time for Joy, where we give practical advice for weathering life's storms and hear inspiring stories of resilience. Today's guest, Rosemary Rawlins, is the epitome of what this show is about. Welcome to the show, Rosemary.
Oh, it's great to be here, Sandy. Thank you for having me.
Rosemary, your husband Hugh was in a terrible bicycle accident in 2002 and suffered a traumatic brain injury. Before we get into his journey and his recovery and his whole story, I'm sure everyone wants to know, how is Hugh doing today?
He's doing great, actually. He's very athletic. He's riding his bike. He's surfing. He's retired. He retired early, but he had been able to return to work. So we're very, very fortunate.
And as you know, unfortunately, my husband also had a brain injury. It was from an illness, not a traumatic brain injury. And we went through many, many difficult years, really horrible years. So I do have an understanding of what that was like. This question is equally important to me. How are you, the caregiver, doing?
I'm actually, it is 22 plus years out now from the accident. And that's 2 decades. I'm a different person now. Sometimes I look back and I think, I can't even believe it really happened. We had 2 years of hell and then several years of adjustment after that. And I also did other caregiving for other family members. So it's a long journey, as many people know, and it's an endurance kind of thing. You have to just keep on getting through every day. But there are those little sparks of hope and happiness that pop up. And, I am at my core an optimistic, positive person. Today, I'm doing much, much better. I had been hypervigilant, which we'll probably get into. I still have some sleep issues. Sleep has been really hard for me. But other than that, my life is wonderful.
So I know it can be painful, even traumatic, to go over the story, to relive that awful, awful time. But you said you would do this for us so we could understand what it's like for a family when somebody has a traumatic brain injury. So take me back to those early days. What happened the day of the accident?
Well, Hugh and I had been married 24 years. We had 2 daughters who were just early teens, 14 years old, and they were twins. And Hugh, as I said, was athletic and he was going out for a bike ride. So he left the house, and a little while later, I got a phone call saying, do you know a cyclist? They didn't even weren't even sure of his name or anything. And it's that horrible phone call nobody wants to get. And I ran straight to the hospital. They told me he might not live, which I couldn't even believe. There's such a sense of shock at that initial news. It's horrifying. I had a dear friend come and sit with me in the hospital who was the perfect companion. She knew just what to do. She didn't tell me not to worry. She didn't tell me not to cry. She was just there. And, I've learned over the years that that's exactly the right way to help someone. And it was so comforting. But when he first woke up, he was just pulling tubes out everywhere. He was in total agitation, confusion. He had 2 brain surgeries, ICU. They did a craniectomy where they move part of his skull to reduce the brain swelling. He watched cartoons. I mean, this is a man who watched the stock market and read the Wall Street Journal, and he had no attention span. He lost the use of his left side completely, and he's left-handed. And it was just, horrible.
He couldn't probably talk correctly, read, write.
Oh, no.
When someone has a traumatic brain injury, it impacts everything,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm. Every single thing.
How can you describe what that's like to people when your husband doesn't even know who you are?
It's life-changing because when he first recognized us, it was more like a hand squeeze. So we thought, oh, great, he's back. And then little by little, as he couldn't even really speak much in the beginning, he wasn't making sense, and we thought he was just confused. But then when I said, we'll be going home soon, and he said, where's home? That just hits you in the heart. And it's just the kind of thing where you cannot control. Everything is out of your control. And it's a double shock because you thought, you get that hand squeeze, you get the eyes open, and then they don't know who you are.
And that there right there was the sort of that dividing line we all feel of this is life before the accident and then there's life after the accident. And I remember when my husband Michael was in the hospital about 2 weeks or so after he was admitted, because they thought he might not survive also. And they said, your husband's going to survive. And I was like, great. And I looked at him and I was like, I guess in a couple weeks we'll be okay. We'll be back to normal, and now when I look back and I think about how naive I was, and it's just shocking how little people understand who haven't been through it of what a brain injury means. I know the doctor said the same thing to you that they said to us. How long is it going to take for my husband to recover? We don't know. What was that like, all the unknowing, not knowing?
I'm a person who plans everything. I'm like that mother that if my kid doesn't make the bed just right, I fix it. And not knowing what's going to happen, in the future, you just feel so unstable and so emotionally unstable because your whole life is upended. It's mind-blowing. It's sad and it's scary and it sends you to a place of darkness that, people can't really imagine. There was a therapy visit we had where our neuropsychologist told us, go home, grieve for your old life, and start a new one. And that sentence, I never will forget that sentence, hearing it and thinking about what that meant. There was a before and after, as you said, right after the accident. But I don't think we realize it for many months.
Were you or were you not prepared adequately by the hospital or physicians or nurses or social workers for what was to come? I will tell you, I did not feel prepared at all when I left the hospital. I left with no information. And I kind of had to figure a lot out on my own. What was your experience with figuring this all out?
At our last team meeting at the hospital, we had 6 or 7 doctors around the table, and I recorded the meeting because I knew that my brain wasn't working. I was tired. They said he might be going home, so I wanted to record everything. And it was utter shock that they were going to send him home. And they said, I kept saying, what about the middle of the night when he gets up? Oh, put a bell on the door. And so it'll wake you up when he tries to open the door. I'm like, are you kidding me? And how am I going to wash his hair and hold him up in the shower? He's 6 foot and I'm, smaller than he is. He had the skull removed, but the skin is there. So it's like all soft under there. And they did not wash his hair in the hospital because they were, it was too dangerous, but I was supposed to wash him at home by myself. It was just, it was overwhelming. No, I was totally unprepared. When we did go home, I hired a night nurse and paid cash. I used up my money market fund to hire this nurse so that I could take an Ambien and sleep 6 hours because I couldn't sleep when he would get up at all hours, and we had stairs in our house. It was really, really hard. I don't think anything can prepare a person for this, but the fact that hospitals just eject people, that's what it feels like. It feels like you're ejecting people out of a plane during an emergency. It's just really hard.
It's chaos, frankly. It's nothing short of complete and utter chaos.
Yeah. And for children, like they lose both their parents. Their dad is critically injured. They were the center of our lives. Everything. Like I wanted kids for a long time. I had them when I was 32, and they were the core of our whole family. Everything centered around their life, and then all of a sudden it was like, don't disturb mom and dad. Your father's critical. Your mother's too stressed out. And they had all these surrogate parents and aunts and uncles coming in. It was very disruptive.
It's horrific no matter who goes through it. But if your spouse goes through it, then you as the caregiver, you don't have your biggest typical support system to help you. And at least in my case, you do kind of feel like you're parenting your spouse for a while, because when they have a new brain injury, people can be very childlike, actually. For that period of time where your spouse is no longer your spouse, but needing really supervision, I mean, how did that feel for you as a wife and a spouse?
It's horrible. I don't like telling him what to do. I had to tell him what to do all the time in very specific terms. And
For instance,
oh, anything like just prompting all the time. At first, it was like you need to put your underwear on before your pants. I mean, it's sequencing and all the little things, the prompting. It's time to brush your teeth. It's time to comb your hair. It's time to take a shower. Time to have dinner. Um, it's it's exhausting because you're living two lives at once, and you're frustrated and you're feeling guilty about being frustrated, and it just hurt my heart so much to see him like that. I just wanted to put a big blanket over him and take care of him too. But I had those frustrating moments all the time, and I had so many other things to do, and everything was slow motion, slow walking, slow talking, you know, trying to get to the table. The girls had to get to dance class, they had to get to school, they had to do homework. It was very, very difficult to get through the day.
he continued cognitive therapy after that, and then was he eventually able to go back to work?
There were several years where he worked part-time, and it turned out he got hired at a decent salary as a CFO in a much smaller company than what he had been in, but it was a high capacity job. He made a remarkable recovery. It's very out of the ordinary. Um, and I attribute it to a lot to exercise and to his athletic mindset and to the shape he was in before the accident. But it took years for that to come back. I mean, he lost that in the brain injury, but it came back slowly, very slowly.
And you wrote a book about Hugh's accident and recovery and how it impacted the whole family, called Learning by Accident. It's a fabulous memoir that I highly recommend. What made you decide to write the book?
I had kept a diary, a journal, the whole time. And I always was a writer. I loved poetry and writing and reading. And I had all these notes, and I said I could write this book, and it took me years to write it, to really decipher it and to learn how to write a book, because I should have studied creative writing, but I was pushed into business. and and so I did. I wrote it. Our neuropsychologist was interviewed for the New York Times, and he featured us. He said, "I want you to meet Rosemary and Hugh Rawlins, who I worked with." And it was during Gabby Gifford's brain injury, and we were in the story with her. And then I got a call from a literary agent, and I got a book deal. So.
The good news and the bad news. The bad news is you're in the New York Times because your husband had a brain injury. The good news is you got a book deal. The silver lining of the brain injury. So how has the book been received, and how has it been helping both survivors and caregivers?
Once the book was published, I had a book launch. at Library of Virginia, and then I started giving keynotes around the country at rehab hospitals and brain injury associations, and I did that for several years, and it was very well received. It's done well. It is still out in hardback.
People read it, they feel validated, they see their story, they see themselves in your story.
There's definitely validation in the shock and awe of all of it. um, there's a connection. There was no Facebook when I went through this. There was no place to go and find another caregiver who was dealing with this, and none of my friends. You do find out who your friends are. Like, it's interesting. Some people actually really gathered around us, and other people just stayed away, a little afraid of what was going on. And so, I really wanted to find my tribe. Like, who can I talk to about this? I can't really get through this by myself. And people that haven't been through it can really not imagine it. So once I started speaking at these seminars, everyone, you get so many people coming up and saying, I relate to this, I relate to that.
In addition to writing a book, you had a blog on a website called Brainline. What is Brainline all about?
Brainline.org is a fabulous website that has everything about brain injury for people who have sustained a brain injury, and as well as families and caregivers and children and parents. And it's a connecting place and a place of learning. You can have resources from doctors and therapists there, and also Brainline Military. Just a wonderful thing. The overarching company is WETA, the Washington Educational Television Association. I was their first blogger on Brainline, and I wrote many, many blogs. It was about the same story, but different aspects of the story, like how do you deal with finances? How do you get through the day? How do you talk to doctors? All of these things. And then I felt like we needed other voices. So then I became the blogger editor, and I hired other bloggers, including you, to come in and tell their story. And it became a wonderful, connection, just a really great spot for people to learn about brain injury, connect with other caregivers, and not feel so isolated.
Doesn't the writing itself help the person who's doing the writing to process what they've been through?
Yes, it's very well known that writing is therapeutic. In fact, there were some people on Brainline who are experts in this, who go around the country giving seminars to soldiers in how to write about their feelings and how to write about their experience and process what happened to them. Because often we don't want to say things out loud. And, there's a saying my sister told me long ago. There is the truth you tell yourself, the truth you tell others, and the truth you won't even tell yourself. So the truth you don't even tell yourself is what we're trying to get at. We know the truth we tell others. We know the truth we tell ourselves, that everything's going to be okay. But then there's that truth we don't want to tell ourselves. Maybe things aren't going to be okay. Maybe I need to, figure this out. And it's that finding meaning in tragedy and finding our own strength. Like, who are we now? We've changed. Everything has changed. And it's just a way of working things out like a puzzle. It's almost mathematic. You keep writing and writing through your sorrow, and then you start to see little shades of gray and shades of light, and then even gratitude.
Isn't that amazing? I remember when Michael was in the hospital, and it was at a point where we still didn't know where he was going to survive. And I took a shower, but there was no hot water. And the water was freezing cold. And I just remember saying, I'm so grateful that I can stand up and take a shower, because my husband was paralyzed on one side at the time and couldn't get out of bed. And I just remember thinking, I'm so grateful I can stand. It really, there's nothing like a terrible, terrible tragedy to make you grateful for what you do have, right?
Yeah. I had a saying for a long time that any day is a good day when nobody's in the ICU.
I'm quite sure that you're the person who taught me the phrase ambiguous loss. Boy, that was like a light bulb that went off in my head when I heard the term ambiguous loss.
Mm-hmm.
What is ambiguous loss?
Ambiguous loss is a lot about grieving for a person who looks like themselves, but is a completely different person. It happens quite often with dementia, where somebody who was once very lively and active and gregarious suddenly, loses their memory and loses the light in their eyes. And there's an expression when people become flat. It's flat
Flat
effect.
affect, yeah.
Yes, and so you see this person and you're grieving the person who's still with you. You're grieving for the old person they used to be and the relationship you once had. And that's ambiguous loss. It happens in brain injury, in dementia. It happens with missing children.
Sure.
They're there. It's a horrible loss because there is no answer. And there's really not a way of figuring out, what to do next, how you can fix this. There's not a closure. Like I try to tell people, if you cut someone's arm off, they cannot use that arm. There's no arm there. And it's a similar thing. Like the brain can sometimes rebuild connections, but sometimes it can't.
Exactly. Or it will rebuild some but not all. So there's always things that are a little bit different or a lot different. And like you said, every single brain injury is unique, every recovery is unique. So I think it's one of the most complex tragedies that can happen to somebody, and there's just no way to know how things are going to wind up. And I wanted to ask you about the aftermath for you of having gone through this with Hugh. You mentioned to me once that you actually had some PTSD.
Yeah, I was formally diagnosed with PTSD. And part of it was right after the accident, when we saw the police report and I read the police report, it was very descriptive. And I kept dreaming about it. And it was a car. My husband was on a bicycle and a car hit him directly from behind at 45 miles an hour. And he went into the windshield, over the roof, and hit the pavement. And was awake and screaming. And I could not get that image out of my head. I couldn't unsee it, as they say. And I had trouble sleeping. I had, serious fears about driving in bad weather and skidding or snow or ice or anything like that. That I might do that to someone else. It was definitely PTSD, heart racing, inability to sleep, stressing, and being very hypervigilant. So hypervigilance was probably the longest thing that took me to get over because my husband still rides a bike. And I did go into therapy. We went into couples therapy to learn how to be a couple again because he had a different personality after his injury. And that was a struggle for both of us. We just wanted to continue in our marriage, and we wanted it to be fulfilling, not just stay married because we were married. We wanted it to be good. And so we went into marriage therapy, and that's when I had, some of these diagnoses. And the hypervigilance, my neuropsychologist told me, it was normal, but I would have to make a decision. Either I would let him do what he does to be himself, or I would have a miserable husband, because that's how important it is to him. He's a lifelong athlete, very serious about it. And he's like, would you be happier if he was laying on the couch all day? I said no. And, so I had to learn to live with that.
How else has this experience changed you, would you say?
I think it's made me grateful for every single day that we have, that there's no crisis, that everybody's healthy, that, my daughters say they were in middle school, and how couples split up. they said, we never worry about you and Dad splitting up because you've been through the ringer. And there's the comfort. It's, we have a really close family, and we love each other very much, and I'm grateful for every day that we have together. I don't think I would have this level of gratitude and if this didn't happen.
And your twin daughters, they were 14 when your husband had his accident. How has this changed them? What do you think the effect has been on them watching you stand by your husband and also pitching in themselves to help?
I think it's made them very grateful. They are very close. We're all very close, but it's affected them deeply. I mean, there's, psychological after effects. There are, one of my daughters just took up cycling. She's been afraid to get on a bike, and now she's riding a bike again. Um, for many years, they were terrified when we called them on the phone after they left home. Like, they're afraid something happened. They call us right back. Like, that's not normal in a family. When a parent calls, usually your kids are like, oh, it's just my mom, But no, they will call us right back. Is everything okay? And so they know that the power of that horrible phone call, and they are truly grateful, like I am.
How does Hugh feel about what he went through? Is he very self-aware of things that are different today than they used to be? What would he say his experience is?
Well, my daughters often say that I and my daughters went through the brain injury, not Hugh. He doesn't remember it. Um, he has some vague memories of rehab. I don't think he thinks about it too much. He doesn't have any fear. He never had any fear of getting back on the bike. It was all me. Uh, I find that stunning, to be honest, that, you know, he wants to get on a bike. It's dangerous. There are cars everywhere. But he loves it, and it keeps him fit, and it keeps him healthy and happy, and he has great friends. And a lot of men don't have friends, and he does. And I think that's important.
That's wonderful. And you and I were talking on the phone one day, and we developed our friendship because of our husbands both having brain injuries. You were speaking at a conference at Health South where my husband worked, and we met at lunch, and I felt like I'd known you forever. I really did, Rosemary. I mean, other than a cognitive therapist that Michael worked with, been no one else in my life who really understood what we went through besides you.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I called you and I said, "How are you, Rosemary?" And you said, "I'm great." I was like, "What? Really? Great?" And you're like, "Yes, I've decided to choose joy." And I was like, wow. And I was so inspired and amazed by that statement. And I was a few years behind you on that. I'm catching up with you now. But what did you mean by that? I'm choosing joy.
Well, I do think that once you get over the initial shock and the initial caregiving, and you start to develop a routine and get back into life, there comes a point when you have to let it go. And every day we wake up is really, a new opportunity. And I think I was born with a happy gene. I've always been sort of a joyful person, but joy is very different than happiness. Happiness is sort of a spark in the moment and a laugh out loud. I think joy comes from a deep sense of love, gratitude, and reverence for life and, what you have around you. I think about even the times we're living in, to be born where I am, to loving parents with a home, a roof over my head. All of these things are gifts that not every person gets. And so waking up and choosing to acknowledge that and feel that is very important. And I think what's really important too is living in a way that feeds your own mind, body, and soul. Writing was very nourishing for me, sharing the stories. And then I outgrew it too. I did it for several years, many years. I repeated the story. I shared with other people. And then I felt like I needed to really let it go. I left Brainline. I began reading, novels. And I wrote another book and a historical novel and historical fiction, and just began living again. And I think, just finding joy in every day, every sunny, happy, relatable day that you can with people around you that you love is important.
Absolutely. So, how are you doing now with Hugh still riding his bike? Because riding a bike for Hugh is not going to Wawa and coming back. How many miles does he typically ride?
Oh my gosh. Well, he trains every day, just about. And then he takes he's on a training schedule, and he has raced again a little bit, but not too much. But he rides, a short ride would be 30 miles, a long ride, 75 to 100. We live at the beach now. We retired in the Outer Banks, and we live a half mile from the ocean. He's also a surfer. So he's like living the life. He loves it. He's in great shape. He looks terrific. I'm doing really well too. I volunteer a lot, and I have a lot of friends, and I get out and I'm in book clubs, and I'm in a writing group, and I might start a dream group where we analyze dreams. Kind of interesting. So there's a lot of, things that we can all do that don't cost money, but they feed our soul. I think girlfriends are very important to me. I have really close, wonderful relationships with women that I trust and I can confide in, and, they can confide in me, and it just helps.
Loving family and friends, living in the moment. From her writing, it is clear Rosemary has once again found joy.
Watching Hugh adapt and never give up gave me the courage to pursue a writing career. Luckily, I found a writers group that is all about craft. We write for ourselves and for each other. We write for the love of it, and that's the reason we should do most things in life. I'm sorry I had to learn all this by accident, but the truth is, I'm glad I finally did.
Rosemary Rawlins, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It was so great to see you, Sandy, and give my best love to Michael, too.
If you found today's show helpful, please share the information with someone who needs it, and follow Still Time for Joy for more practical tips on weathering life's storms, as well as inspiring stories of people who have turned their pain into purpose. Please consider supporting the work that goes into producing the show on Patreon. Follow Sandra Levine Productions on Facebook and YouTube, and learn more at sandralevine.com.